So every other day, my students are asking me to dab, and I go hit the Googles, and you come across an artist named Drake. Calls himself an artist, not a musician, because, well, he's not a musician. And you listen to his music, and it begs the question, can something be called music if no musicians were involved in its creation? But that's not the real question. The real question is, has music gotten worse over the years? And it's actually a little bit more complicated answer than what you would think. Most people would say, yes, it's gotten worse, but I'm going to kind of dig into that assumption a little bit. And maybe we might come up with a slightly different conclusion or a little more balanced conclusion. A little background. A while back, I made a video called Plot Has Become Irrelevant in the Movies. Kind of reflecting on the success of a lot of movies, especially like Force Awakens, that don't seem to have a coherent story but still receive, critical and audience praise, which, that's me decrying a change in the market. There's more things that make a good movie than its story, but I think a story is pretty important. But going back to music, has music gotten worse? Has all media gotten worse? We have successive books like Twilight, which are quite badly written, and that makes you think, maybe we're getting stupider, art's getting worse, what's happening to pop culture? But I want to present to you one critical idea, which is that we often, and I know I'm using we, often people, including me, I'm quite bad about this, have a bias towards the conservative, or a conservative bias, a bias towards past experience. And this is really, really common. So the bias is the things that you're familiar with, you view as better than the things that you're unfamiliar with. This doesn't mean that Drake's music is good because it's unfamiliar, right? It just means that the things that you've already cataloged in your memory as being good, obviously you're going to first look to those to compare anything new to it. So it's really rare that, like, if you grew up listening to Led Zeppelin 4, there's not going to be that many records that come across that you come across in that style that are gonna kind of equal that attachment you have towards it and the quality of that work. So it's kind of a comparison thing. They also part of it, and I made this point in a comment earlier today, I think, is that we remember what's good and we forget what's bad. That's the nature of memory. Like, you don't really remember all the bee stings that you've had, but you probably remember the time that you scored the last goal in the soccer game and won the soccer game. You probably remember the people that you've had romantic entanglements with, even for a single night. You tend to remember the standout events and the things that are good in your life, and you tend to forget all of the noise, all of the bad stuff. So when we look back, we're like, music used to be better, because we go back and we see the first 4 Led Zeppelin records, they're amazing. The first 5 Black Sabbath records, they're really great. And we're like, why can't music be that good? Like, the early 70s is where it's at. What we forget is all the garbage that was coming out in the early 70s that just kind of doesn't end up in the memory because we don't listen to it after we've passed that point in time, right? And it's the same thing from any era. I'd have friends, because I was a teenager in the 1990s, so I have a lot of friends that are really biased towards 1990s music. They think 1990s music was like the peak of music, and that music started to suck in 2000. And if you go to someone who was a teenager in the 1980s, they're like, music started to suck in the 1990s. You go to someone who's a teenager in the 1970s, and they're going to have that attitude there. So the bias, this is a bias towards the conservative. And my experience, and I'm going to try to provide a little bit of evidence for this, is that most things in popular music, at least, are actually not good, and we have forgotten the ones that aren't good, and we remember the ones that are good. Not everything's Led Zeppelin 4, right? That was the only Led Zeppelin 4 came out in, I think, 1971 or 72, and what surrounded it in your memory that was also good. There was probably a couple other good albums, but there were probably thousands of albums released that year, and you've forgotten all of them, even the ones that you may have heard songs on the radio for, because they weren't good, or they weren't good enough to even make it on the radio, and so they end up being forgotten. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to pull up a Wikipedia page here, which this Wikipedia page just has a list of all the number one hits since like 1940. Like the year, like the most popular stuff for the year is over here. So it goes all the way back to, and I'm going to link it in the description, goes all the way back to 1946 at pop charts, and then we start getting albums in the 1950s. So if we go back and let's go back to the 1950s. We have Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis Presley in 1956. So that's not too bad a tune, right? But if you actually dig down and look at music, if you try to put your bias aside, like what makes bad music? And if you're like, well, Drake is really simple and stupid, and he doesn't sing, and everything's repetitive, it's like you go back and listen to Heartbreak Hotel, and there's like one section to the music. It's pretty repetitive as well. So a lot of the things that you apply to bad music today can be applied to even good music in the past. There's a lot of repetitive pop music going all the way back to the 1950s. All Shook Up. All Shook Up is not a particularly deep song, right? All Shook Up is a pop song, and it's kind of empty, kind of vapid. If we keep going down our list here, by the most popular album was My Fair Lady. Actually, you like My Fair Lady, so there's going to be good stuff and bad. I'm trying not to cherry pick, so I'm like, let's look at the most popular of the year. We get down to 1964. I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles. And the Hello Dolly original cast, like these soundtracks were very popular albums, I guess. I Want to Hold Your Hand. I Want to Hold Your Hand is a song with two formal sections, very simple chords, and absolutely garbage lyrics, right? And if you're a Beatles fan, that's great. I'm going to guess most Beatles fans are not going to look at their like breakthrough material like, I Want to Hold Your Hand and Love Me Do as like their great work. They're probably looking at stuff like Rubber Soul and Sgt. Pepper's as like the great work of the Beatles, and the Beatles did progress a bit. But I Want to Hold Your Hand is not what I would consider like a very deep song, right? It may have emotional attachment to people. Like my father he'd come on the radio and he would talk about how, this was like the popular song when he was like a freshman in high school or something like that, and he has that memory. But at the same time, or maybe he was in 8th grade actually, when we look at it objectively, that song is not like a very meaningful song. It's pretty much garbage, guys. It's pop, and most pop music is gonna be garbage. And for those of us who are really big into, let's say, like heavy metal, or jazz, or like progressive rock, or you're into classical music like me, or you're into Baroque music especially, then like everything's going to seem like garbage compared to that because the complexity level is so high. I tend to compare pop music to like Cat in the Hat, right? So Cat in the Hat, there's nothing wrong with Cat in the Hat, but Cat in the Hat is for people who can't read Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings is for people who can read Lord of the Rings, right? Complicated literature is for people who are capable of reading complicated literature. Complicated music is for people who are capable of listening to and understanding complicated music. It takes a lot of listening experience and critical thought and musical experience to be able to listen to Baroque music and really get the full experience out of it. You got to listen to things that have a little more to them than I Want to Hold Your Hand. Wooly Bully, not much to that song, right? This one, Ballad of the Green Berets, that's an interesting song. So not all these are going to be too vapid. Hey Jude. Hey Jude is a song that a lot of people have affection for. I know that. But it's, again, one of these Beatles songs with two formal sections and a lot of repetition. I actually think Hey Jude is repetitive. Not just it repeats a lot, but it's repetitive. Of course, we do have Jimi Hendrix was apparently a very popular album in 1968, and this is an interesting album I think worth listening to. So there's going to be good stuff, but there's going to be plenty of stuff that today we'd be like is not, Sugar Sugar by the Archies. Oh, come on, right? Bridge Over Troubled Water, that's a good song, and it's a good album, right? Joy to the World by Three Dog Night, I don't know about that. Jesus Christ Superstar, yeah, that's pretty cool. So there's good and there's bad. But notice there's no Led Zeppelin in any of these. Led Zeppelin 1 through 4, they're not even on the charts. When it comes to the end of the year, there's stuff that's way more popular. And that's okay. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means it wasn't like the most popular thing in any of these years. 1974, The Way We Were by Barbra Streisand. that sucks, right? I do not like Barbra Streisand, and I think that song really sucks. So there you go. Elton John's okay, I guess. Already we have a greatest hits album, which are bad. If you keep going through, you're going to see a lot of this stuff. Blondie, The Knack, My Sharona. Not that much to it, right? Let's keep going. Let's jump down to the 80s. Faith by George Michael. Right? It's another vapid pop song. Let's keep going. The Sign by Ace of Base. Nirvana is not a band I like, but they're not even like on this. They're not even on this. Macarena, 1996. Macarena. Come on. All right. If we go all the way through, all the way down to like 2014, Happy by Pharrell Williams. There's not a lot to Happy, but it's not a terrible song. And, we have some popular like Taylor Swift albums the last couple of years. Alicia Keys, I think, is bad personally, and I hate the Black Eyed Peas, and I hate Keisha deeply. But there's plenty of bad stuff behind this. Usher albums, which are god awful to me. So my point here is that and forgive the long-windedness of that. The point here is really that we have this bias towards what we already like, and we think that what we like is what is representative of what was going on at that time. And that, I think, if you look at that list, I think that might demonstrate to you that may not be the case. Led Zeppelin was great, yeah, but Barbra Streisand was more popular than Led Zeppelin. Think about that for a minute, and then I think that you'll help yourself to dispel some of the bias. The other thing about has music gotten worse is that stylistic change in music is not really driven, in my experience or my opinion, by an increase in quality of any kind. People seek novelty. They seek novel pleasures. And so most of the change that you have in pop music is due to some novelty, right? The Beatles were so popular because they just sounded different from what else was going on them, right? It could have been any band that had a really different sound, but they had like the right sound at the right time to really capture people's imagination and give that novelty. And then I think they were successful throughout the 60s because they continued to have more and more novel things. Like they continued to be novel over their next like 6 albums, and that, or actually I know like 10 or 12 albums. They came out so many albums in the 60s, but they continued to bring novelty out. And I think if you go back and you look at some of the critical responses to the Beatles albums, especially in the late 60s, I think that those are somewhat a little more balanced than people would be today. People are very afraid to be critical of the Beatles, and back then they weren't. So there's stuff that, might be like a 3-star review of say, the White Album. And when I listened to the White Album, I listened to the White Album the other week, and I'm like, yeah, this is maybe like a 2-star album to me. There's like, maybe the songs bat 500 as far as whether I think they're actually quality songs. And then there are good songs that I like on it. But, I think a lot of those older critiques may be more accurate than us who are kind of looking with our nostalgia glasses. So we have to be careful with that. So has music gotten worse? A little bit, yeah. And the way it's gotten worse to me is not so much in the complexity of the songs, because the songs haven't really gotten more complex or less complex, but in the quality of the musicianship that's on display. Because we have really, really good production techniques now, we're able to really cover up for bad artistry. There's a really viral video that was on YouTube of like Britney Spears singing without autotune. Autotune has made people who are literally incapable of musical performance being able to show up on a recording. This is like a godsend for the recording companies, even though like the recording industry's had a massive decline over the last 10 years, mostly due to the internet and all kinds of factors of that. Imagine you go back to the 1990s and it's all image. You had like Spice Girls. By the way, Spice Girls was the top album in 1997, right? So if you're feeling nostalgic for the 1990s, best think again. That's like to take that image, to take the Spice Girls image, and to have it sound presentable. To be able to divorce the image and the musicianship has always been a dream of like a marketing person. To be able to put whatever image you want, whatever attractive person onto whatever musical product. ends up being resulted. That's always been a little bit of a dream, and we can do that now. That's why you have like Usher, who to me doesn't represent any level of musicality, and you have these producers and these other musicians that kind of craft the music that goes below it. So in that way, I think it's gotten worse. I think the face of music has had a huge decline in talent, but that's not 100%, right? There are artists out there who can actually perform, can actually sing without autotune, all that kind of stuff. So keep it in mind, it's not 100%, but I do see that there's been a decline in the amount of musicianship. And I do teach like an electronic music class, and what seems to sell a lot of kids is like this idea that they can make music without having any musical knowledge, and then they get into the nitty gritty of it and they're like, this requires more experience than I thought it required. It requires more thought than I thought it requires, and that's a really common thing for anyone that's jumping into music, whether they're jumping into programming or they're jumping into guitar or something like that. The amount of practice it takes to become even moderately proficient at a musical instrument is quite a bit. The Beatles, although I did like talk some smack on the Beatles spent years. They spent like 2 years playing like multiple shows a night in Munich. And you're going to get very good at whatever you're doing if you're doing it every single night. And they did. Whatever that sound that they had crafted, they became very, very, very proficient at playing that sound and very proficient playing with each other. So even though I think there are better musicians out there than the Beatles for sure, they were very good at what they did because they practiced it a lot. And I think that level of practice is missing from a lot of artists more recently. Anyway, that's how I think it's gotten worse. Now I'm gonna try to end this with a much bigger picture. I'm gonna go back to that stylistic idea that styles change because of novelty, not because of increase or decrease in quality or complexity or anything like that. If you compare, let's go back to our 18th century music history. If you guys know your music history, you know that a lot of music historians say like the Baroque ends when Bach dies. Bach dies, that's the end of the Baroque, 1750. Thus begins the Galant, or the classical period, but the Galant is a little period kind of coinciding with Bach's death before the classical style really takes off. If you compare the Galant to the Baroque, it's like night and day. The Baroque is so complex, especially the high Baroque style and the German Baroque style that Bach composed in, that Sylvius Weiss composed in, that even George Frederick Handel composed in, even though he's thought of as English, he's originally from Germany. These guys wrote very dense music, very tight counterpoint, very long forms. They wrote masses that were hours long. Long cantatas, complicated organ pieces, complicated lute pieces. All this stuff had a very deep level of complexity. Theoretical complexity, formal complexity, that means like the arrangement of musical elements. Like in a modern song, you think like verse, chorus, bridge. And when I say Beatles have just two sections, I mean they have like just verse, chorus, verse, chorus, verse, chorus. That's a common thing. But anyway, very complex formal arrangements in Baroque music, complex counterpoint, that's the action of notes one against another. Then you look at the Galant, and the Galant is incredibly simple by comparison. The Galant has just these smaller, shorter pieces that are just an A section, a B section, and an A section again, in a really, really easy to hear way. The accompaniment becomes sort of simple chords, simple accompaniment with like one melody, and that kind of influenced the classical style. The classical style is about one melody and chords, whereas the Baroque style was all about like multiple melodies happening at the same time. And so there's a big step down in complexity when you go from the Baroque period to the classical period. The theoretical complexity of classical music that came directly after the Baroque, especially in the Galant style, is a massive step down. And the period before the Baroque style, the Renaissance style, was just as complex as the Baroque style, if not more so, but complex in a different way. That one was all about polyphony, multiple melodies happening at the same time. Very difficult to perform Renaissance music, especially Renaissance vocal music, unaccompanied Renaissance vocal music. Yes, very difficult. The classical period is much simpler. Then you have the Romantic period, which is more complex than the classical, because they just kind of took that style to the next level. And you have it kind of build up towards the end of the 19th century into the Post-Romantic, which is really taking all the forms that were developed in the classical period to their like maximum extreme. Then the 20th century happens, and you have this shift over to like atonal music, like a big shift. And the shift to atonal music is not because it sounds better, right? It sounds different, and that's why people started using that style. That's why you had the primalist style that Igor Stravinsky made popular. It's why you had Arnold Schoenberg and Anton Webern doing their 12-tone thing, because it was novel, it was different, and that's what made it interesting. Nowadays, when people go back and listen to atonal music, most of them hate it. I like atonal music, but I'm crazy and weird, and I listen to black metal all day. So, of course, I like Arnold Schoenberg as well. But I think that most of that was popular because it was novel. You also have in the 20th century artists like John Cage, who did crap like open up the piano and don't play it for a couple minutes, who did stuff that was like attach microphones to my mouth and eat crackers, and that's the music, right? Aleatoric music, all that kind of stuff. It's all about novelty. And once the novelty wears off, it's forgotten. And I guess that's where I want to come back to with pop music. Most of you who are as old as me or older may vaguely remember some of the things that were popular, but what you really remember are the things that you liked. And the things that you like, you're selecting through all the noise. You're already filtering in all the noise to find like this one thing that you like. Like maybe in the 1990s, you were really into Pantera, right? And you're like, Pantera was good in the 1990s. And that's what I remember is like 90s metal was awesome. There was Morbid Angel and Pantera. It's like, yeah, but there was also a lot of garbage out there in the music world. And maybe you like Nirvana, but there was also Ace of Base at the exact same time. And that's much... Nirvana's not particularly complex, but it's certainly very different from Ace of Base or Macarena or Whitney Houston, Boyz II Men, Garth Brooks, right? Those are the really popular artists of the early 90s, not actually Nirvana. So, think about that. Think about your bias when you consider the idea of have things gotten worse. In some ways, they're gotten worse. In most ways, they just get different, and we have a bias, I think, towards what happened before. That's why it's really important to try to eliminate that bias and really think about what effect does this thing create? And that's how I try to approach things when I'm critical of music, when I'm critical of movies, when I'm critical of books. So I'm trying to think of the effect. I'm trying to eliminate the novelty response. I guess we could call that a novelty bias towards the novel or bias towards what's new. Some people like things simply because they're new. Other people dislike those same things because they're new. We have a conservative bias, a bias towards what's old. So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out my websites down below, dvspress.com, davidvstewart.com. Let me know what you want to see and what you want to hear. I'm always happy to deliver, and thank you for taking this journey with me. I do appreciate the company. I do appreciate the comments, which always make me think in new directions. And please have a very, very good day.